Hi again, this is Danny Ceballos with Unleashed Consulting and the Best Boss Bootcamp. Here doing a series of 3 to 5 minute short bite-sized videos specifically on the topic of change, leading and managing change. You'll remember at the end of the last video I talked to you about what it was to understand and lead through negative change. So I'd like to contrast that now and talk about what it is to go through positive change. So you remember we talked about this dip in the roller coaster of change that happens when we're responding to negative change, where things are better before they get worse, and then they're better again. Or more specifically, we talked about these 8 stages, which should sound very familiar and look very familiar. They're very similar to what goes through with the stages of death and dying. So change, whether we're talking about something dramatic, something significant like death and dying, and or organizational changes. When people are experiencing change, they can experience it very, very similarly. So let's talk about what it looks like for positive change, right? Because not all changes are bad and bad news. Some changes are really good and good news. It may be good news that you're receiving, a good change that's happening in your life, and or it may be for your team or your organization where you're bringing them a new value add to their work, whether that's a new piece of technology, a new piece of support, a new schedule, those kinds of things. Well, we can expect some things to happen with positive change too. So I want to show you this interesting graphic, and we're plotting this against time. So as time goes by, but also, surprisingly, the level of pessimism that often happens. So I want you to think about change like a marriage, so a traditional marriage, when 2 people come together to be married. And it starts off very low on the pessimism scale. Everybody thinks it's going to be terrific. It's the honeymoon stage. So we call that uninformed optimism. I don't know exactly what it's going to be or what exactly this marriage is going to be about, but I sure feel good about it. But more often than not, as time goes on, we start to realize our partner maybe snores a bit too much or doesn't put their clothes in the hamper or is just not quite the person that you thought that they would be. And so we say that we are moving into informed pessimism. So oftentimes with positive change, we start to realize we either get tired of it or it doesn't have the lasting effect that we want it to have. And so we say that's informed pessimism. Now we know what's going on. I know it's not everything that I thought it would be. And so then something very interesting happens, and this is where this curve peaks. So typically now people make a decision as they've gone through this positive change, and that's not quite exactly what they thought. They can choose to check out and say, I'm not going to work on this. I'm not going to keep moving forward with this positive change. I'm going to leave this positive change because it doesn't feel good right now. Yeah, that's right. Even with positive change, there can be a time where it just doesn't feel good. So the choice is yours. The choice is for the folks that you are supervising, and you want to empower them with that choice. Is this the bus to stay on? Or maybe it's best if we leave. However, if we do decide to stick with the change, we move through the honeymoon, the marriage continues, we're working on the marriage, and that's where we come into hopeful realism. And you see we're starting to drop down on the pessimism scale and moving closer and closer to lack of pessimism. And sure enough, as time goes on and we move through hopeful realism, we get to informed optimism. So you see it's a bit of a roller coaster, but it's a different kind of roller coaster than it is with negative change. So if we were to kind of overlay both positive and negative change and how we can think about them, we can pretty much expect a roller coaster where things start off. And if you just look at this top level of descriptions, this is where I want you to pay attention to. We start off with well-being, then there's a shock, whether it's good or bad. There's adjustment that happens. There's that inner work. Remember we talked about the inner environment and the inner crisis, and then finally moving to the outer, let's make this happen, let's make it work. William Bridges, very famous researcher in management and leadership practices, talks about change as the transitions model. And just as we started this discussion of change, we're going to end it. And we're going to say that we can expect 3 things to happen when people are moving through change, good or bad or indifferent. It's the endings, the ending of the current state, moving into something what Bridges calls the neutral zone, where we're trying to figure things out, where we're doing the inner game, the inner work that needs to happen, and then finally moving towards beginnings, the beginning of something new. So we're going to finish up there. I hope you got a good sense of both negative and positive change and the roller coaster that accompanies change. That gives you power both in your life and in your leadership and your best boss work and working with the folks that you supervise. And I hope you'll share these expectations that one can have as one is going through change. Next time, we'll talk a bit more about how to get people on board with change and what you can expect as you're leading and managing change efforts. And I hope you'll join me. This is Danny Ceballos with Unleashed Consulting and the Best Boss Bootcamp, and I hope to see you around real soon.